Right, so humanitarian aid isn't supposed to be a threat to your life. It isn't supposed to come with bullets, airstrikes, or a dose of opioids baked into your daily bread. But in Gaza, under the dark shadow of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, funded by Washington and stage managed by Tel Aviv, or thereabouts, that's exactly what it does. Aid has become ambush. Red lines are firing lines, and the flour might come laced with something far more addictive than carbs. GHF aid sites have become scenes more reminiscent of Squid Game, where starving civilians are forced to dodge sniper fire in the hope of getting food, only to be rewarded with food that may well be tainted with highly addictive opioids, it seems. This isn't humanitarianism, it's state-sponsored cruelty disguised as compassion, exported from Israel and rubber-stamped by the United States, with Trump seemingly rewarding the GHF now for a job well done, with a $30 million check. If this is what Israel and its allies call relief, the only real relief seems to be relieving Palestinians in Gaza of their lives. Welcome to the ongoing dystopia that is your average GHF aid site in Gaza, where death comes free with every ration pack. Right, so the Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, has turned aid distribution in Gaza into ongoing scenes of absolute horror. From live gunfire raining down on starving civilians to deadly opioids now being hidden in sacks of flour, GHF has become a chilling symbol of the weaponization of basic human needs by the most base of human beings. Hailed by the United States and Israel as a lifeline for Palestinians trapped under siege whilst making sure they've cut Hamas out of the loop. Not that they ever were in the loop when it came to aid. This is just the depraved accusation aimed at the UN, no less, via aid distribution outfit UNRWA, who apparently became Hamas, all a convenient excuse to take over aid distribution themselves, or what they claim passes for it. GHF has just continued to spiral into further scandal as time's worn on, though, more violence and more war crimes. According to recent reports from Haaretz, Israeli soldiers have admitted they were ordered to fire on unarmed Palestinians queuing for food. Testimonies describe scenes that resemble a cruel game of red light, green light, with soldiers taking aim at desperate civilians in what is reportedly being called Operation Salted Fish, where the aid points have been turned into killing fields. The IDF's own military advocate general has been forced to open a war crimes investigation into these allegations, though Benjamin Netanyahu and his demented Defense Minister Israel Katz have dismissed the reports as lies and propaganda, and the accusations as no less than blood libel, because of course they have. This carnage is not incidental, it's systematic, so Netanyahu and Katz can shove their faux offence where the sun doesn't shine. In the past month alone, at least 516 people have been killed whilst trying to access aid at GHF aid sites, many of them gunned down under live fire simply for waiting in line. And now IDF soldiers are admitting that. Witnesses describe a terrifying reality that you must run for your life, even when all you want is bread, because otherwise you won't eat, and you won't get away either. The UN has now warned that the weaponization of food in Gaza could amount to a war crime. Doctors Without Borders have gone justifiably further, though, calling the GHF operation slaughter masquerading as aid, and accusing the foundation and its Israeli handlers of conducting crimes against humanity. The UN Human Rights Office has echoed those sentiments over their parent organisation's hand-wringing, condemning the use of humanitarian aid as a cover for state-sponsored violence. And yet, despite these horrifying realities, the United States recently greenlit an additional $30 million for the GHF, ostensibly to support its mission of humanitarian relief. But what exactly is the Trump administration funding here? With bodies piling up at food lines, it is impossible to ignore that Washington is financially backing a mechanism of state terror here that is nothing but an Israeli front, masquerading as a charity. The aid system is being used not to save lives, but to destroy them, sometimes slowly through starvation and psychological torment, other times instantly through bullets and bombs. This grotesque, now month-long sham has now taken an even darker turn, as reports have emerged that oxycodone, a highly addictive opioid, has been discovered inside bags of flour distributed through the GHF. Oxycodone has been discovered in flour at 4 aid sites across Gaza as whole pills or traces of oxycodone inside flour sacks, and eliciting fears as to how long Israel may have been tainting the food. Medical professionals are now warning that even minimal exposure could trigger addiction, especially in a starving population, while withdrawal could lead to seizures or even death. There's growing concern that the drugs were not merely stashed, but ground up and mixed into the flour, making the contamination harder to detect and even more dangerous. Oxycodone is dangerously addictive. It is powerful. It's an opioid commonly prescribed for severe pain, the severest pain, often to cancer patients as a for instance. And its non-medical use can quickly lead to dependency, respiratory depression, or even fatal overdose. A significant risk here, not knowing the amounts being added to the flour or for how long this has been happening. For a population already reeling under siege and trauma and hunger, the sudden introduction of such a drug could lead to an even greater public health crisis. Gaza's government media office has accused Israel of using drugs as a soft weapon to destabilize Palestinian society and increase misery. And the suspicion is hardly far-fetched, is it? With the GHF controlling aid distribution and Israel controlling what aid gets in, as well as being the financiers behind the GHF in and of themselves, the flour has had to come from US Israeli-backed aid shipments, not from anywhere else. If proven to have been deliberate and planned, this act would not only be another violation of international law, yet another one to add to that ever-growing list, but a textbook example of yet another war crime. And yet amid all of this madness, signs of hope and resistance still manage to persist. Aid convoys organised by local Palestinian tribal leaders in the north successfully repelled Israeli-backed looters and handed supplies over to the World Food Programme, which has distributed them without incident, of course. Those local efforts have proven to be more effective and humane than the GHF, demonstrating that aid distribution can occur without carnage, so long as it is independent of the Israeli military apparatus, which the GHF is not. It's a blatant scam. Middle East Eye reported on how the tribal leaders, rather than relying on a discredited foreign operation, took it upon themselves to deliver the aid directly to civilians in need. Their bravery stood in stark contrast to the cold, calculated violence of GHF distribution. But success invites backlash. Following this local success, Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich intensified their calls to cut off all aid into Gaza, even that managed by the GHF. In an effort to appease these ultra-nationalist members of his fragile coalition, Netanyahu announced a complete halt to aid entering northern Gaza. According to the Cradle and Quds News Network, the Prime Minister made this decision not based on military assessments or humanitarian concerns, but purely for political survival. Smotrich had threatened to collapse the government if aid was not stopped, and Ben-Gvir, eager to even outflank him to the far right, demanded a total end to all relief. The consequences have been devastating. In northern Gaza, where there are no GHF sites at all, incidentally, residents now face starvation with no alternative, though one resident told Al Jazeera, "We would rather starve than be treated like animals at a GHF site." This chilling statement captures the full measure of how degraded the aid apparatus has become in Gaza. No one should have to choose between starvation and being gunned down whilst queuing for food. And yet this is exactly the choice Israel has forced upon the people of Gaza. Even Israel's claims that Hamas controls aid distribution have been thoroughly discredited. Investigations from Mint Press News and Quds News show that it is not Hamas, but Israeli-backed actors like the Daesh-backed Yasser Abu Shabab who are looting and redirecting the aid. These reports expose the rank hypocrisy in Israel's narrative. It is not Palestinian resistance that is stealing food from the mouths of starving children, but Israeli-aligned criminals operating under Israeli protection. Meanwhile, Israeli military retaliation has grown ever more savage. But if the GHF thought it could operate with impunity, it might have thought wrong, and it could be its own carelessness that undoes it now. In a rather significant development, Swiss authorities have initiated legal proceedings against the GHF because they failed to register themselves properly as an NGO under Swiss law, based out of Switzerland as they are. Nothing to do with what is happening at those aid sites. They just haven't bothered to do their own paperwork properly, potentially rendering them an illegal operation as a result, though given their conduct, they are far worse reasons for that, it would appear. The GHF has become the grotesque embodiment of humanitarian aid turned toxic. It has facilitated the mass killing of unarmed civilians, distributed flour laced with addictive drugs, and served as a fig leaf for the political maneuverings of an extremist regime teetering on the edge of collapse, the only thing keeping it together being worse and worse war crimes right now. That it continues to receive support from the United States is a damning indictment of American foreign policy and its complicity in crimes against humanity, aiding and abetting Israel all the way. Worse still, the media coverage in much of the Western press has either downplayed or outright ignored these latest atrocities. Every new revelation, every bullet, every poisoned sack of flour, every child dying of malnutrition, adds another layer of horror to an already unthinkable tragedy. Yet the world just watches, issues statements, wrings its hands, and in the case of the Trump administration, funds it all anyway. The GHF must be immediately dismantled and a genuinely neutral, internationally monitored aid corridor established to get food, water and medicine to those in need without risking their lives. Such a vehicle already exists. It is called UNRWA, who are not Hamas and never have been, but do know what they are doing, and that's why they had to go. Legal accountability must follow as well. Every commander who issued an order to fire on civilians, every official who allowed oxycodone to enter the food supply, every politician who funded or defended these policies must be held to account for it. If there's to be any justice, if the word humanitarian is to retain any meaning whatsoever, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation needs to be dismantled, its leaders held accountable, and its backers confronted with the consequences of their actions. The people of Gaza deserve real aid, not bullets. They deserve food, not poison. They deserve dignity, not degradation. And until the GHF is dismantled and proper aid distribution restored, stories like this will go on to remain all too common. Where oppression remains in Gaza at the instruction of Benjamin Netanyahu, it is costing him domestically, with so many Israelis having fled Iranian rockets, the bubble of Israeli invincibility having burst. They aren't actually too keen to come home again and are in fact setting up home elsewhere in such numbers that locals there fear they're becoming Israel 2.0 now. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, but are spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated. Holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.